jumping into some discussions with them a bit later when we get into some conversation around some of the stats that we're joining. Guys, thanks so much for joining. I do know that everybody's life, especially in November, at the end of November, kicking into December, is absolutely manic and crazy. And so I do appreciate the time that you're putting aside for this. Let's jump in. There are people here that this will be your first introduction to Digitlab. And so just to give you a bit of an insight and understanding to who we are, I'll just share a small introduction to our business and what we do.
People. What remarkably extraordinary creatures we are. We can feel the full spectrum of emotions in one day. We have the potential to make things beautiful and stand strong for what we believe in. We're passionate, curious about the unknown. We evolve and reinvent ourselves. Driven by the desire to connect, we've built a digital world. The global village brought people closer together than ever before, offering a new environment to do business on. But what does it take to survive in this world? Simply put, you need to understand the person on the other side of the phone, as well as the phone itself, creating a unique middle point where people and technology meet. That's where you'll find Digitlab. Through technology, we find ways to make people's lives better and thrive on challenging what's possible. Coming from different backgrounds, our team brings fresh perspective and dynamic thinking. With us, you get a partner that's just as invested in your success as you are. Sure, you could do things the way you have been, but we've got a feeling that doesn't sit well with you, just like it doesn't sit well with us. So, let's stop calling things impossible and start making history.
So everyone, thanks so much for the time again, especially that is a bit about who we are as a business. We really do find ourselves in this place where people and technology meet. We've worked in marketing and HR and various different facets, and this is that space that we really find fascinating between technology and people. And so when we put this survey together in the beginning of the year, and we really wanted to understand particularly marketing and where marketers were in their digital journey, but also how that would impact the consumer space. We really wanted to unpack this as best we can. And about halfway through this journey, we realized that it would be really fascinating to bring trend experts and digital experts and consumer experts and people into this space. And so we put out an all call to our network of partners and friends and family and everybody we could get in touch with, and got in touch with them and said, would you like to take part in this journey with us? And so we were blown away by the caliber of people who said yes to join us on this journey. And so what ended up happening is we ended up with about 20 odd really high level people who contributed trend reports on top of that. And so as you kind of step into 2024, we've got this research paper with over 120 people that have submitted survey reports into there from a business perspective that we've been able to analyze. But then we've also got really great insight from these trend analysts. And so it's a powerful, powerful stepping stone for you to be able to step into 2024 that we're excited to share with you today. Livestorm as a platform from a webinar perspective is new to some of you, so feel free to hit that emoji button that you'll have there. It helps us as presenters and speakers and guys on the set just to know that you're still alive on the other end and you're taking part. It keeps us engaged and knowing what's happening. We also want to let you know that if you have any questions throughout the process, we are going to open for discussions about halfway through this session, so please fire questions in, because we will engage those questions and bring them to play. If you have any questions for a specific person, you can address it directly If you just have a random question, I'll figure out how and who the right person is to handle that. So please fire them in. If there are any questions that you don't have, that we don't manage to get to, we'll manage to deal with those in some other way and get them to you. The other thing is that if you're looking for the full report, we have literally just put it live in the last few minutes. On the same link that you registered on the site, you can actually get hold of that. There is a little caveat. We do want people to take part in next year's survey. So if you fill out the survey for next year, you can get your hands on the full, whatever, I think it's like a 56, 57 page report with all the trend results and full set of survey results. So you can get your hands on that. I think Tash will share that link with you during the course of the session as we go. Oh, there you go. She's done it already. So there you go. Right, let's jump into the actual report deck that we've been sharing. We had the privilege of launching this last week at the Digital Marketing Conference in Cape Town. So the first time we presented this was at that conference. It was a really great time to present. It was a really great excuse to fly to Cape Town and be there to present these statistics. This was an hour-long presentation, so I'm going to give you the 25-minute overview of that. And as I said, the details are in here. We've also been very honored that this has been picked up by a number of publications. The interactiveagencies.com have picked it up, and they've released in the initial press releases. They're busy digesting the full report at the moment, and we're expecting some further analysis coming out from them over the next few weeks. Biz Community have been gracious enough to cover this as well, and so have Mark Lives. And so we've seen some really great response from the industry, and I think a lot of you today who have actually submitted actually came in from the coverage on Biz Community especially. So here we go, Insight2024. Let's get into it. So as I said to you, 120 companies, 20 top trained digital experts worldwide took place to provide this really large report at the end of the day. To give you an idea of some of the people that participated, to give you an idea of the caliber of people that took place. It really is a privilege to count ourselves amongst these people. Everybody loves to know what the data actually looks like. I always find this personally the most boring part of presentations, but everybody likes to get an idea of what went into this. And so to give you a bit of an idea of where we're sitting from a business size perspective, this is the graph that'll tell you where you're at. We have a big chunk of people sitting in the under 5 million a year business range. And this is your 5 to 10 mil in this quarter here in this green section. And then we've also got some good large business spaces in here, and then this between this gray and this purple would be your mid-sized businesses. Throughout the report, you'll hear us talk about dolphins, marlins, and whales. And this is an analogy that we use to talk about different sized businesses. Dolphins being your small businesses, they are your less than 10 million a year. Your marlins sit between 10 and 100 million a year in revenue, and your whales are higher than that. Now, why we use this analogy is that the nature of these particular animals themselves really do resemble these businesses, and we unpack this a bit more in the report so you can get an understanding of why they're there. But they also help us to be able to group these together so that we can unpack the differences between these as we go through the report. So you'll hear this analogy come up throughout the report and throughout the research as we go. We've got a good breakdown of different types of agency, different types of businesses. Whenever you write a marketing report, you end up with a good quality sort of selection of ad agencies that take part. And so we've got a good section there. But we do have a really good representation across other businesses, right from telecommunications and finance, all the way to the automotive industry and healthcare, pharmaceuticals, food and beverages, etc. And so there we go. Let's jump into a few kind of our first insight that became very apparent right up front. and this came out of the demographic data, and that is that immediately it became apparent to us that the business world today has become far more intricate for us to be able to look at just B2B and B2C, or even B2B and B2B2C. as market segments to be able to understand the differences and the nuances in segmentation marketing. So ordinarily, when we sit in front of clients or we sit in front of businesses, we tend to ask people, are you a B2B business or a B2C business? And the general answers are B2B and B2C. And over the last few years, people have been throwing around B2B2C. And what we're seeing in the data is immediately this is a too simplified question to be able to actually understand the nuances of the business. That businesses are changing because of the dynamics and the pressures that they're finding, and that there's a whole series of new types of businesses. I'm not going to unpack the slide. You can download the report to understand more about this, but this is a really huge opportunity for us to really understand that business is more nuanced. And when we talk about how we engage both the digital world as well as the consumer world, we need to be able to understand that the business world is shifting and the way in which we engage people is different. And so if you took the last year's report, you'll see that we asked you, are you a B2B or a B2C business, or are you both? This year, we're asking that question in a slightly different way so that we can try and unpack more of this type of information differently. The big question that everyone wants to know is, what are the most effective channels? And so we wanted to unpack this, but we didn't want to make this the main thing of the report. We wanted to answer it, but we didn't want to make it the only thing. I do find that a lot of digital reports tend to focus solely on platform, and I really wanted to expand our reach to really try and build out more about digital as a whole, particularly in the marketing space. But we tackled this, and we did talk a bit to B2B and B2C, even though some of the data was a bit blurred, but we were able to get some insights that were valuable. So if you take a look at this graph, you can immediately start to see in the top sections here where people find the most value. And what was key here is to understand that we're asking businesses here, what is effective in achieving business goals? And so we're relating this back to the achievement of business goals. And that was what was important to us to really understand, is that we don't really want to know like how many clicks or what got you a lot of engagement and all these things. But what actually at the end of the day, when it comes down to like financial value in the business, and however you choose to measure that, what is actually delivering on business value? And so when we come back down to it, we see that SEO, social media marketing, your website platforms, content marketing, and email marketing coming up as your big, strong staples. And I think that this is really notable because we know these as like staple kind of environments, but they're also tried and tested. These are not new systems. These are not new structures. These are very tried and tested. And even when we get down to things like pay-per-click, and I think that this is, if we were to have done this report last year, I think this would have been slightly higher, in the year before possibly even slightly higher, because I do believe that all digital advertising is starting to see a decrease in its effectiveness around this space. And so I think that there's a very interesting conversation that's taking place around this bottom sector here with things that are in play. And this isn't necessarily saying that these aren't effective, but these are definitely seeing less effectiveness right now across the businesses that we surveyed. I'm going to suggest that if you download the report, that you dig into this diagram a bit more, because it's got a few nuggets in it. But what I'm going to share with you are mainly these two insights that we've got on the table here. B2B shows a higher reliance on digital channels than B2C. What generally tends to happen is B2C tends to have a bit more of a broader approach between traditional, or if we call them traditional these days, traditional and digital channels. And so while there's a lot of the same digital marketing work, when we spoke about effectiveness, B2B always rated these channels as more effective in their environments than B2C channels and B2C businesses did. And it's a really interesting nuance. So whilst both ranked social media the highest in effectiveness, B2B in almost every single case always ranked it more highly. And so we see this big reliance in B2B businesses for digital channels, and even down to things like influencer marketing. across from 22% to 34%. And I think that we often would take something like an influencer marketing and box it into a B2C environment, but we forget that things like thought leadership across platforms like LinkedIn and blogging platforms is an influencer marketing tool set. So we can sort of bear that in mind and those kinds of things. So right across the board, the only one that's slightly different here is content marketing. Here in the B2C space, it clips slightly over with an extra percentage point on the B2C space. And my belief on that would be that content marketing is that one digital marketing tool that supersedes both traditional and non-traditional and digital spaces. And so there's a core, you can invest in that and kind of speak to all marketing channels across that. So really powerful in that respect. Yeah, so quite interesting in that case. So in this particular slide, we see this question around measurement coming to play. And what I'll raise here is that when you see how people measure, the key attribute all the time is that the main attribution tends to be on the last mile. So it tends to be on sales revenue, tends to be on lead generation, conversion. There's very little focus at the end of the day on things like the first mile, the attribution of building up demand, and top of funnel attribution inside organizations. And so this idea that digital as a lead generation pipeline is a very powerful thing, but there's very little measurement around the idea that there's top of funnel opportunities in this space. And I think that has a lot to do with just business not prioritizing top of funnel activities nearly as much as they provide. They see that end of funnel activity as the key priority. So if we jump into some data-driven conversations, as we know, data is a huge conversation right now, and there's a big conversation shifting around third-party and first-party data. And so there's these big topics around this, and it's a piece where we see lots of laggards, we see lots of people like firing forward, and we really wanted to understand more about what's taking place in this. So we asked a couple of key questions. So what we found was that when we asked this idea around data-driven strategy, the general state was that most people are in a place of kind of this space of data awareness, which essentially put them in this place where they were manually compiling standardized reports. And when I presented this presented this data at two different conferences last week, both of those conferences were all kind of nodding their heads in agreement, because there's this feeling that like we get all of our data from these different silos, from these different platforms that we have, and then we end up manually providing them in a PowerPoint presentation or something. So there's still this need to like compile into meaningful data that we can actually then use. And so this data awareness piece is where the majority of businesses find themselves. And then you have this sort of outlier at the top there in data savviness. What I found really interesting as we kind of dug in and we ran some data analysis across this was that the higher the revenue, the less data maturity we see. There is a caveat that very small businesses tended not to be particularly, so they would tend to be data aware or have no data strategy in play. But as you kind of eclipse to sort of slightly bigger, smaller businesses and then into the mid-range, that's actually where a lot of your data savviness and data proficiency lay. And then as you started to add more revenue and move into our whale category, that's where you started to see less data savviness start to appear its head again. And I think with some of the data, the budget data that we're going to see later, that we're going to see a really big upset between mid-sized businesses and large whale businesses in the future. And I'll explain more about that later. And so the general feeling is that the data proficiency of mid-sized businesses should be a massive concern for larger enterprises right now. When we dive into marketing management, we see this particular key insight coming through, and I'm not going to try and unpack this because from a time perspective, I think we can discuss this later, but there's a very key thing taking place here where we are prioritizing our personal gut as marketers and decision makers and budget over customer input. And this is flying in the face of a lot of what we say almost religiously, that customers should be the center of our business. And so there's this tension between customer, budget, and our own, and the way that we're geared as marketers to kind of run with our own gut, that we need to try and balance out. And so it's a really interesting insight that comes through from that perspective. And when we look at like what businesses are training people in and what knowledge they're in, there's a groundswell of in-house knowledge that's growing stronger and stronger, particularly for resources around social media, strategy, search engine optimization, etc. Which is interesting because then if we look at what our trend analysts are sort of showing us in their articles, is that AI is looking to commoditize a lot of these services. And so we're almost like building skill sets in areas that AI is looking to cannibalize and commoditize in the future. So it's going to be a very interesting space in the future for us. Now, if we dive into budgets, I wish I could say that I've got a perfect trend for you here. But because our economy is so uncertain right now, what is very clear to us is that every business is applying very different types of things, types of strategies and investment opportunities. We've seen one or two interesting things taking place, but and possible opportunities, but the general consensus is that everybody is kind of adopting their own strategies. So what I can show you is that in general, the general trend for large whale organizations is that in tough times, you take out a CapEx and you invest hard in marketing, because that's how you solidify your position and ensure that you survive. And so that's what we're seeing here. The purple line has increased significant increases in marketing budgets. The turquoise line is your slight increases in marketing budgets, and your gray line is stayed the same. Pink is decreased significantly, and slight decreases is your orange line. So you're seeing the majority of whales sitting in this normal best practice scenario. In smaller businesses, we're seeing smaller businesses stay roughly the same. Slight increases to try and stay in the market, but generally staying roughly the same, more conservative in their approach to marketing budgets. In mid-sized Marlin type organizations, what we're seeing here is a slight sort of increase, with a couple of guys increasing quite significantly. And if you break this data down even further, it's the top end guys on this side, so the sort of 50 to 100 mil plus that sit in this top category, and the lower end guys sitting in this the category here. And this is what's quite interesting, is that if you take the data proficiency, it sits with these guys. So in the data that I shared before around here, with these this particular data savvy team here, they are the same category as this significant investment sitting in here. And this is rare inside whale organizations, to see these massive significant losses, cutbacks in budgets. And I think it's got a lot to do with our economic times and seeing how certain businesses are cutting back on budgets significantly because they need to survive. And I believe that what we're going to see over the next sort of year to 5 years' time is we're going to see a big power play between these businesses that are able to now compete against these whales in a lighter fashion because of their data strategies and their understanding of customers and their ability to move swifter and cleaner and neater and lighter because of their data understanding, and their inability to be able to move that quickly. And legacy systems, etc., and the fact that they don't have the marketing budget to compete against some of their competitors here, and the data structures to be able to compete here, that they're going to really struggle to be able to stay in this market. And so normally what we would see without data is we would see these guys lose to these big boys. But I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of these bigger organizations lose to these mid-sized organizations, who will probably stay the same size from a people structure, but will gain incredible revenue opportunities going forward. And then when we take a look at how budgets are allocated, what's interesting is that the dolphins here tend to spend the majority of their budgets seem to either sit in less than 10% on digital, or they sit up here with up to 75%. And that, I think, has a large point to do with the fact that their budgets tend to be smaller, like just brand value smaller. And so like if you were to spend money on, say, a banner or a signage or something like that, it would take up and swallow quite a big chunk of that. So, or print advertising, etc. So you either see that or you see an adoption where it's majority digital in that case, sitting up here to the 51 to 75. In the Marlin space, you see quite an interesting shift. Most businesses are sitting in the business spend sitting sort of from the 25 up to the 75 to 100 space sitting in here. So really interesting to see the adoption of digital in the marketing spend here. And then whales tend to be a little bit more holistic in their view, from some spending less than 10%, but the majority spending sort of 11 to 25, 26 to 50. Very few. There was one outlier who spent 100% of their budget, and they were a billion rand business, but they spent 100% of their marketing on digital. But the majority sitting here, so a lot more kind of like a weighted approach across all digital channels. And then I'm going to close out with some conversations around MarTech, and then we'll move to some discussions. But all I'm going to highlight around MarTech is that in the CRM space, bigger businesses tend to be more advanced in CRM, but we're seeing relatively decent but low success rates. Marketing automation is almost non-existent. So CRM and marketing automation, if you're in the CRM game, are almost linked. But it's almost like these two aren't seen as the same thing, but from a technology point of view, they almost are. So it's a weird space. But bigger businesses are seeing this, but the vast majority of people are not adopting automation at the space at the moment. And those that are really struggling from a success point of view to be able to manage that adoption, that success of their automation correctly. Email marketing rises time and time again as the top-ranked tool for implementation and effectiveness. And I think this has a lot to be said around the redundancy of certain technologies and communication tools, because when we have redundant communication tools that people know how to use and execute, it is a really great way to communicate with people. It's not always the most innovative way to connect with people that is the better. And then in the social media management space, we see social media management tools being considered as necessary as part of you. If you're going to jump into social media, you need a tool. It's kind of like a hand in hand. And then in the media management space, low satisfaction on technology and almost outsourced the majority of time, seeing that if I'm going to have a media management tool, that I must rather outsource that to the people that are managing the media rather than have my own tool sets in play and bring that technology in-house so that I can understand my customers better. What became really interesting is that email signature software, jumping back into email conversations, email signature software saw relatively high implementation rates, close to around, and not quite as high as sort of social media. But what was interesting is that they saw some of the best success rates. So what we see here is that businesses are not high on implementation, but once implemented, they see some of the best success rates on implementation and performance of email signatures being able to drive marketing agendas. But the general consensus is that right now, businesses not actively adopting MarTech, and there seems to be an external reliance on service providers, very little adoption internally from marketers, and to build software into the business to accelerate marketing activities. And that is the survey piece with a couple of key insights that have sort of come to light. And so I'm going to pause there for a second and just see if anyone has any questions that they want to fire at the chat that have posed themselves. I see that we've almost doubled in the number of people that have joined us over that period. And then some of our speakers, our panel will join us in the session, and we'll start throwing some questions around. So if you do have any questions and that you want to fire at us, you're welcome to. And if you don't, we've got a few in our pocket as well. Okay, there are no questions, so I'm going to ask you to hit an emoji button so we know that anyone else is around and that you're still there, so that we know we're not talking to nobody. Okay, thanks, guys. We appreciate that. All right, cool. So, guys, let's jump into this. So, I took a long shot, and I dropped Bronwyn Williams a line, who has been. When you track her on LinkedIn, it's basically been traveling the world and talking to people and doing all sorts of things. And I took a long shot and threw something out at her and said, would you like to take part? And so she very graciously said she would. And I asked her to really lean into the economic state of South Africa from a consumer space, because that's something that we, as marketers, especially with a report like this, don't get that view. And do yourself a favor and take a read from her on her trend report, because it is really, really powerful to see. But Bronwyn, you raised some interesting dynamics that sort of speak into e-commerce. They speak into what we could potentially see in an e-commerce space. Like, everyone's kind of pushing for e-commerce being the big thing in digital, and your view is yes, but no. And a lot of what you're saying is coming down to the economic changes that we've seen and that you believe we're going to continue to see. So I'm quite interested in just getting your views on that. What are consumers facing, and what should we be understanding that we're up against as marketers?
Well, I think when it comes to e-commerce and like online sales, I think it's very important to separate real growth from perhaps what appears to be in the short run nominal growth. And I think I've been quite concerned attending quite a lot of marketing conferences over the last couple of months with how excited retailers are about how e-commerce sector is growing, but not necessarily understanding where those sales are coming from and what they're cannibalizing, and also what the sustainability thereof is. Obviously, in terms of growth, if you're starting from a base of 0 or from very low penetration, you're going to see fast growth in the short run as you just try get up to, say, the international average as to what percentage of sales overall are coming from online as opposed to offline channels. Now, the challenge is, particularly in the South African context, is that our economy is not growing. In fact, by most metrics, it has shrunk, right? I mean, don't be fooled by sort of CPI or GDP figures that are nominal figures that don't hide like the actual purchasing power or the actual wealth of South African citizens, right? Like, since COVID, we've really been stagnating. Whether you want to call it a recession or a depression, it's not all that different. But marketers should be very hesitant to think that they are setting that their past performance in terms of like online growth is going to continue into the future if the overall economy around you is not actually growing and your consumers are getting poorer. And I think that where it really concerns me is where people get really excited about the growth of online sales that are backed by short-term and, quite frankly, very poorly regulated debt products. This is something we see all the time. We see this idea that financial inclusion equals access to debt. But debt, of course, is basically like running on a treadmill. You have to grow faster in order to stay ahead, just stay in the same place when you are basing your economy or your personal finances on debt, because debt is expensive, because debt comes with high interest rates, often higher interest rates than you can get on your savings. So in other words, if your e-commerce figures are based and your growth projections are based on giving your customers access to debt, like buy now, pay later services or payday loan services or whatever sort of little bits of credit that you can give them, that all these new fintech companies will give to both you and your customers so easily, you've got to understand that's not sustainable, because those debt products only really give you a head start once. As soon as you try to do that again in month 2, you're chasing your own tail, and you're in fact chasing a smaller piece of the pie. So the only way e-commerce sellers, marketers, brands or businesses can expect continued growth in the e-commerce sector is for it to either come from somewhere else, in other words, cannibalize sales somewhere else, which is a highly competitive sort of strategy and also not particularly long run, or the other way is to find new people to give new lines of credit to, and sooner or later you're going to kind of run out of those too. So I do like to separate the ideas of healthy growth, which comes from a growing, flourishing economy, and unhealthy growth, which is based on sort of short-term sort of disaster looting and taking what you can from a sinking ship, which is not going to be healthy or sustainable in the long run. So that was basically the sort of the outline of what I wrote about for this report.
Mike, I think
Mike,
you're
you're mute.
And it was really insightful what I had to say. No, so I want to lean in like your comment around like healthy versus unhealthy growth is important to me, because this is something that I've been tackling with some of the industry conversations that we've been having, and like we've been running these webinar series with quite a few people, and some of what I have to say is relatively unpopular as well, because I've sort of said to guys, so a great example is a loyalty program. Like all of a sudden, everybody is launching a loyalty program of some sort, which I have an opinion, and it's an opinion. It's not necessarily the truth. But I have an opinion that loyalty programs discount your best buyers. And that so rather than retaining people, you're just discounting the people that will already stay with your business, as an example. Now, that is an example of healthy versus unhealthy growth. Yes, you're building as marketers, you're building a loyalty program, and theoretically you now have something that you can say, oh, we've got 20,000 people who've joined our loyalty program, tick. We've done something to help make this thing work. But then when you look at the revenue numbers that you're actually driving on the back end, there's a very different conversation, like what you're saying with debt-based sales on e-commerce. So, I mean, I don't know what you guys think of this, but like, it almost feels like some of what we're doing to survive in the economy is almost hurting the business model to try and sound like we're doing better things. And if you guys have any comments in the chat, you guys are welcome to throw that out there as well. Vince, you're on mute, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, what you guys are saying is right, that there's a bit of short-termism going on, and everybody's trying to protect, I suppose, some trading profit metrics, things like that would be negatively like influenced by a downturn. I've often had questions around long-term sustainability of some of the things that get done, you know. But by the same token, I think also you've basically got to hustle based on the circumstances, right? And what I thought was quite interesting was in that set of diagrams around who's increased and who's decreased marketing spend.
Yeah,
there's two scenarios there. The one is like, let's try and save ourselves to greatness, and then the other one is let's back our product and drive for growth during this time when things are difficult. And I don't think, you know, if you average that out, you don't get the right picture, right? Like there's two very different thought processes going on in those organizations.
No, exactly. And there's one thing that has happened, and I've seen a lot of these stories, is that there's a new type of CEO that has kind of risen to the fore as the new hero post-COVID, especially, who's kind of come to the fore as a hero, and that's the guy that can come in and make the hard decisions and keep the budgets tight and actually just look after the business instead of cast these massive visions and budgets to the wind. Let's go and spend a crap load of money, and we're going to make these things happen. And if we excite people and head them in a direction, we're just going to make it all work. That's always been the hero. And since we've had these incredibly low resources, we've got this new MD, CEO hero that's come to play that is very good at managing their businesses and finding even incremental growth, like minus small growth, but inside very tight resourced environments. And it's quite fascinating to see. So yeah, I think there are multiple stories. Like I said, like there's no standard model that we're seeing come out of those budgets. Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, guys, keep the chat running if you have any questions. Vince, I'm going to stay on your side for now. We saw in that data, and we've seen like it's very clear. There's a big data driven mid-sized sector that is very strong in their understanding of data, and we see that the higher in general, a very general statement, but generally the higher the revenue, the less data savvy we see businesses getting. I know that you've had experience like quite across the board between these businesses and across multiple different sectors as well. So I'm interested to lean on that experience and get a feel for why you think that larger enterprises seemingly struggle with pace in adoption around this type of thing, and why you think that mid-sized organizations can keep up pace, and if you feel like they can be competitive to these whale organizations, or if you feel like these whales don't need to worry.
Okay, so I guess at the heart of it, there's a big factor around how long you've been in business, whether pretty much everything that you're basing your business on from a stack point of view feels like legacy today. So some of the smaller businesses, for example, may be newer and have more modern systems, right? Which makes it easier, I think, to integrate your data and to create pipelines for that data to get to where it needs to be. Just looking at those graphs, though, I've got a strong sense from what I've seen around the industry that the perception around being data-driven mostly kind of stops at this idea around data-driven decision-making in an insights and retrospective type of way. So in other words, how quickly can executives, for example, get insights from their customer data to make decisions, and then they make these decisions. But if you look at the other part of the trend, which was that there's been a slow adoption of marketing automation and MarTech in general, what that sort of indicates is that these businesses are trapped in this space where they're kind of aiming to get to somewhere that's already far behind, and actually they haven't shifted their goal set towards data activation as opposed to like data-driven decision making, right? So you see a scenario, for example, where a lot of businesses like will have their data in a lake or a lake house or a ware lake, which is kind of a really like a lunar orientated hairy data lake, but I'm kidding. And so that's what they're trying to get to. What I've been pushing with a lot of organizations that I've worked with is how do you get your data to the point where it's injected into every marketing bid that you're making. It's there during the time when a website page impression is being generated for use during personalization. And to get to that point, you need to be very far away from the warehouse, and you have to be deep. Your data needs to be programmatically available in that moment, right? And you can't do that from a warehouse because it's too slow. So you need like the MarTech stack. You need DMPs, you need CDPs, you need it integrated into your like web applications or your apps and so on. And so obviously, I think as you get bigger and bigger from an organizational standpoint, your decision-making criteria around what tech you use changes, right? So those middle category businesses get to pick something like a Braze or a HubSpot because, and these tools are like tightly integrated and built as a single thing. And as you get bigger and bigger, you suddenly into these like marketing cloud spaces, because those seem like the safer corporate purchasing decisions to make, right? But the challenge with them is they tend to be a combination of different products that are like quite loosely integrated. So the job to be done is much bigger. And then I think attached to all of that is also generally what I've seen is a bit of an absence in vision from a corporate leadership perspective, because of the gap between the CMO, the CIO, and the chief data officer. Those three tend not to be aligned around what should be happening with customer data or first-party data and the MarTech space. And the success stories that I've seen are when everybody understands their role and they understand what the goal is and they're pushing towards it really hard.
Definitely. I sort of talk about, the conversation for marketers particularly, because I think the data conversation gets owned by too many people in the business. But marketers tend to allow the data conversation to become about warehousing, where it should be around triggering. It's like, what are you thinking about triggering to connect with the customer the whole time? Bronwyn, if I jump back to you quickly, from a trends perspective, I don't know if this is a conversation around business trends or consumer trends, but if you were to look at what's coming or what's happening around this technology people space, and how business needs to be able to be quite agile in the way that they're handling data and being able to kind of leverage what they understand of customers as they engage. Are there things that you're seeing there that sort of we need to identify?
Yeah, I think that in general, there's a bit of a danger in thinking too big when it comes to data rather than thinking small, especially in South African businesses, especially as South African SMEs. Looking at your sort of whales across your sort of categories there, we're still quite a small market here. And I think that the bigger question, particularly for South African companies who are trying to then compete with the likes of international companies coming in here, Amazon's coming in here quite strongly, that you can't compete with them at that game, at that big data, know your customer game. There's just no way to do that. But there are very useful, very distinct ways that you can change that around and actually think kind of small with the sort of data and insights that you are looking at. And those are much more durable competitive advantages. You do trade off some efficiency in order to sort of develop that resilience that you're looking at. But that's what you really want. You really want to build personal relationships with your customers that can't be imitated, replicated, automated, and digitized by your competition. Because that's something that I would tell my clients all the time, is that anything that can be digitized can be replicated and can be automated and is no longer a sense of competitive advantage. I've had this argument again with lots of people, or with ChatGPT and AI and all the wonderful things you can do to it. Remember always, those things are not your competitive advantage, because anyone else can also use those same tools. And quite frankly, thanks to the likes of open banking regulation, we're getting to a point where customers are going to be able to take that data with them, not just from a banking perspective, from a general identity perspective too. Not a competitive advantage. That's not to say you shouldn't use these tools, but you should see them as the base case, like having a word processor and using Excel instead of running your bookkeeping on a paper-based books. You can do that, but that's an own goal, right? You got to see this as the base, as the floor, and certainly not as the ceiling. If you are going to succeed, you have to have something more than all of that. Not a competitive advantage, perhaps a necessity. So that would be my overall sort of picture as to what we should if you want to get down to value, competitiveness, and long-run sustainability as a business in this kind of market.
No, definitely. I think the way I phrase it for most of the time is technology is not your competitive edge, it's your accelerator to your competitive edge. And unless you know what that is, then you can't really use tech for something. Tyron, you've had quite a lot of experience across quite large agencies, in-house, across the board. You've been exposed to a lot of MarTech in the middle of all of that. How is the technology conversation from your perspective accelerating business, like the use of technology coming in, as opposed to just the use of services and skills?
Yeah, well, as Bronwyn mentioned, AI is a massive game changer within the kind of agency space. I came from agency for many years, and then recently went in-house, and the actual change within the organization of how many channels and how many avenues of a business, not only with digital marketing, but kind of every part of the business, AI seems to be affecting it. So in terms of tools for marketing, I think things like content creation is obviously a huge one. I work very, very closely with Google search. So, that technology is changing, the way people create content for Google. I think I wrote in the Insight 2024 Insight guide that, Google's search results are pretty terrible. And I think The Verge and a couple of other publications have recently written about how the search results have been really bad over the last few years. And if you look at Reddit, a lot of people complain about how bad Google search is. But that's only because you could probably blame SEOs, and I'm an SEO, so you can probably blame me for some of it. But the reason for that, and where AI and the technology comes in, that it's going to change that, I think, is that when Google ranks stuff, we always look at Google search results and say, okay, what is Google ranking? It's ranking this kind of content, so let's copy it. Because if Google shows us exactly what it wants to rank, we'll copy it and then rank it. So that's what we've been doing for a couple of years, and it's worked really well. But what that's done is it's saturated the search results with bland, boring content. If you do any kind of search, for most topics, you'll read the same stuff the whole time. And I find with the new technology, like with AI coming in and everyone using AI now, and you're kind of getting that saturation again. So you're getting people just using AI, firing their copywriters, and I've seen that happen, and writing, this content that again is bland, and we're going to get this influx of really boring stuff. So I think Google's trying to change that at the moment. So that's the kind of technology I think they're working on, and so they've got a couple of projects they're busy with. One of them is called the Helpful Content System, where they're trying to surface content based on people's experience and kind of surface that content from people who are writing on LinkedIn, people who are writing more personalized blogs, people who are writing on social media, and they're creating areas within search to surface that content. So for example, they've got a new feature coming out called Perspectives, and that's going to be quite interesting to see what kind of content is in that tab. It's going to be a little tab in the search results. And then they've got other features like Notes, which allows you to add a note to some content. So if you find a bit of content that someone's written and you have information you want to add to it, you can actually add notes to that content. So it's almost like a user-generated contribution to content that's been ranked. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm seeing in terms of technology and what Google's doing.
That's fascinating. I'm going to jump to Tiffany now. Tiffany, you've been on the end of this this tech space, but very much on a creative side, and been very vocal around AI and copywriting. We've seen a lot of, we've actually done a webinar with you recently around this as well, but your contribution into the paper had a lot to do with tone and how to kind of manage tone from an AI perspective. But what I wanted to throw at you was, now that everything's kind of being driven around this technology space, Tyron's talking about firing copywriters left, right, and center, and all of these things. How do we actually bring creative? Like, what is the what is the role of creative in our digital marketing space these days? Like, where do we find ourselves with these teams?
I think that what has happened is that the middle of the market has sort of been put under extreme pressure. If you're a creative, if you're a writer or an illustrator or a graphic designer, and you're sort of in the middle, you either have to specialize or upskill to an extent that you are in the sort of upper percentage, or you land up in the lower percentage, at which point I think perhaps Uber driving or making jam or something might be more, a better career choice. And that's purely because if you were a relatively unskilled but enthusiastic writer before AI, and clients were using you to generate what they thought was wonderful, organically optimized content for SEO, but in bulk, you are now redundant. AI can't do it well yet, but it can do it, averagely, or slightly lower than averagely. And unfortunately, for a lot of clients, not so much in the whale, marlin, dolphin range, but below that, the tiger fish and the guppies and the sardines, mediocre content marketing in bulk is highly sought after. So what is going to have to happen, and I feel a little bit like I was nodding the whole time everyone else has been talking, because what is going to have to happen is a version of what Tyron has said, what Bronwyn has said, and what Vince has said. And that's that, I'm going to quote Bronwyn sort of, the hygiene factors have changed. The entry-level stuff that give you permission to play have evolved. They are not what they were. Tech is not your competitive edge. ChatGPT-4 is not your competitive edge. Those are just the hygiene factors. And so what it's going to take for creative and creatives to not fall into that messy middle is, I feel like a bit of a, I feel like I'm repeating myself. I say this all the time. It's relentless authenticity, but not in the way that we used to think it was 18 months ago. It's copy and content and campaigns and comms that are vulnerable, that are geographically hyper-located where possible, that use vernacular where they can, that leverage things that resonate. You've got to be much more nuanced in order to stand out than you ever did before, and you can't get away with as much. So do I think that's a good thing? Actually, I do. I mean, I'm a copywriter by profession, so technically I'm next in the firing line to be fired, if you would believe the media. But unfortunately for the media, I have more work than I can do. And that's because we just have to change the way we think about what we produce, and whether we want to take clients with us outside of their realm of comfort and make them do stuff that before this they would have thought was off the table and completely untenable. So, that's the thing. I completely agree with what Tyron said about brand/boring content. There's been a lot of that out there for too long. That's what the market has come to think of as, the base, and that needs to change. And I completely agree with you, Vince and Bronwyn, in terms of what's in the chat. But what I would suggest is, if you really want to create copy or content or comms that is tonally differentiated, page 63 of the Insight2024 report is where you will find a whole pile of tips. #shameless plug.
No, that's it. Guys, we're running slightly over time, but what I am going to do is I'm going to ask Bronwyn, Vince, and Tiffany and Tyron last thoughts before we duck, because you can jump into any of my webinars whenever you feel like it, but we don't often have these guys available to us. So last thoughts before we jump off. 2024 for these guys that are logged in right now, if you were to leave them with a gem to think about going into this period to strategize for next year, given that we're still in a tough economy, we're needing to think innovatively, and I mean innovatively, not just technically, and we need ideas. We need to think. We need people to help us think beyond our nose. What advice would you have for us right now?
Who's going first, Mike? Should I go first?
Yeah, you go first.
I guess my advice would be whatever you're doing in the MarTech space at the moment, most likely you'd get a better result from simplifying and trying to do something less ambitious that you can execute from start to end, rather than get yourself stuck in a situation where you've got like 5 things that are going to take multiple years. So start small and simpler and kind of get to the results, because the reality is that there's nothing that can beat the learning of having finished something and seeing it actually perform, rather than waiting 6 months to a year for something that's bigger and supposedly better to actually hit the streets. So yeah, simplify and reduce your ambitions, but deliver end to end.
Nice. Who wants to go next? Cool. Bronwyn?
Let me jump in. I think that in general, your customers are looking for good value, not for a good deal. And if your business plan is prerequisite on your customers getting into unsustainable debt in order to afford your product, you need a better business plan or you need a better customer. We should be in the business of adding value to people's lives, not subtracting from it. We want to have sustainable business models going forward. And when it comes to adding value, I think there's a very big challenge here for businesses in the age of AI, like we've spoken about. In order to rise above being mid, it means you shouldn't only be looking at cutting costs. Even in today's economy, you need to be looking at ways to actually add value. And cutting costs in terms of customer service is basically cutting out your only competitive advantage going forward. So add value, don't try and subtract it at this point in time, as difficult as that is.
Nice. Who's up next? Tiffany, Tyron, who wants to go?
I have a feeling Tyron's going to let me go next. It's going to be a gentleman and let me go next. Are you?
Okay, I'll let you go. Yeah.
Okay, I'll put you on the spot there. The reason I want to jump in here is because it ties into what's just been said by my 2 colleagues. And that is that in order to stand out in 2024, no matter what AI does, no matter how good it gets, you have to either say what no one else is saying, which is bloody hard to do, or you have to say unoriginal things in completely original ways. That's what I advise you to strive for, rather than trying to be unique, which is a bullshit word anyway. Try to say unoriginal things in original ways, and then you land up differentiating. Oh, and the lights came. I might be God.
Cool. Tyron, you're up.
I think Tiffany stole my steam there. I was going to say exactly the same thing she just said. Well, I can only speak from my expertise, which is Google, organic search in Google. And, if businesses are looking to succeed in Google these days, it's quite a hard thing to predict because they're changing things all the time. I mean, in the last 3 months, we've had 4 to 5 algorithm updates from reviews to quality signal updates, to helpful content system updates. So we don't actually know what Google's busy doing. They're changing the search results into a more magazine type layout that AI will basically give you the answer in the search results. So we don't even know if we're going to get organic search traffic much in the future. So I think as a business, the best thing to do would be, as Tiffany said, create content that's as helpful as possible. Don't over-optimize your content. So an SEO like myself will say, stuff all these keywords in there, so Google can figure it out. Probably that's not the best advice. It will work for another year or 2, but I think it's going to change where Google is going to seek out better content. So listen to what Tiffany said, basically. Can't be original, but you can be better.
That's epic. Thanks so much, guys. So, in summary, smaller is better. A finished tactic is better than an ambitious strategy. Customers want value, not a deal. Build sustainable businesses that add value, that creates deals for you every day. Add value, don't subtract. Say unoriginal things in original ways. And we have no idea what Google is doing right now. So create content that's as helpful as possible and don't over-optimize. So if that helps you guys in your 2024 strategy, we hope that it does and that you're able to take that forward. We'll keep an eye on the chat. We'll stream that down and hopefully be able to turn any of that into some stuff. And if we do, we'll send you some mails across that. In addition to that, you can get hold of the full report and digest that over the next couple of weeks as you go through. Those that have had a chance to read it have enjoyed what they've seen. We have gone as deep as we can. We've got really good insight from all over the place. So if you're a startup, you're a big business or a small business, there's some good stuff for you there. We encourage you to download it and be a part of it. So guys, until next year, when we start our webinar series again, and then we will release this again for the Insight 2025 in November again. We'll see you then. Guys, thanks so much to all the trained writers and all the guys who took part today. Thank you for your contributions and being a part of this. It wouldn't be the same without you, so thanks a ton, and we'll see you on the other side. Have a good December, because it's only like 2 days left of November. Have a good one, guys. Thanks a ton. Keep well.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers, eh?